are here to talk about identity in retail. And we got 3 very strong panel members here today. And it's quite different types of retails. We have got retail in the sense of cars retailing and leases on cars. We got, I'm originally from Sweden, so of course the Allen keys is the center of my universe. I spent actually yesterday trying to take apart a big wardrobe that my daughter has in her room from IKEA. And then we have the food retailing as well from IDnext. So I think we'll get started. So I would like to welcome Anand up on the stage. He's going to start talking about identity in retail with mostly food retailing in its scope.
All right. Good afternoon. Is it working? Okay. Thank you. So thanks a lot, Martin. First of all, I feel very happy to be here. I'll switch over to the next slide and talk about my identity. So my name is Anand Gujral. Like my identity says, I have recently moved to the Netherlands. It's just been 4.5 months. So I joined Ahold Delhaize in the month of May and moved to the Netherlands in June this year, and been working with Ahold Delhaize since then as a domain architect in the identity security. But talking a bit more about myself, I've been working in this space as an IAM professional for more than a decade now. Started as a software developer, more of a Java developer, right? Back in those days when it was time to build in custom IAM solutions. Not anymore, please don't do that, right? Started as that, built a lot of custom solutions in IGA, worked as a IAM auditor or internal auditor, moved to the privileged access management space, worked for a few years in privileged access management, then started doing strategy projects in IAM, got bored with PAM as well, and now I'm here. Before this, I was working with Deloitte in Denmark, so I was based in Copenhagen, and this has been my recent move to Netherlands, and now I'm living in Zaandam, just near my office. All right, so this is what I would be covering. Introduction about Ahold Delhaize, and what do we mean when we say identity and access management. I know everybody here is familiar with IAM, and I won't talk about IAM at all because I'm sure you know it better than me. I will just talk about what in the context of Ahold Delhaize does it mean, how do we operate, and what are the typical challenges that we face, and where are we moving towards. Also, I will try to share some lessons learned, some of my views, and some lessons that I myself have learned in these 4 or 5 months with Ahold Delhaize. So what basically is Ahold Delhaize? I think it's a very known name in the retail industry, one of the largest across the globe. Ahold has been in this business for like 150 years or more, and it owns around 19 brands. All brands are in the retail space, spread across 10 countries, and these also include some of the very popular brands, very popular local brands like Albert Heijn, eTOS, Gal & Gal. I'm sure you guys would be familiar with this. The challenging part is managing these brands are around more than 400,000 employees that are there in Ahold, and managing these employees is a very central and intrinsic part of the identity and access management team, and that is where all the fun or the difficult part begins. So what do we mean by identity and access management? I don't have any words or text or sentences here, just a picture. This is what basically it means, starting from the sequence 1, which says an onboarding. The figure only shows a person doing some kind of an entry. Since we own a lot of brands, we are divided into a lot of operating companies, it's not very central. So this could be one single person actually doing manual entry, or just creating an Excel sheet and sending us to as a feed, or could be a central SAP system giving us an automatic feed. So that is where the fun begins, where HR person actually sends some feed into our identity stores, and then there are a lot of policies and workflows that gets triggered. It's not just about provisioning to the end systems, but it is about a lot of checks, validations, approvals that go before we actually provision. Also about provisioning, it's not just to the legacy system, it's about hybrid systems in the cloud, everywhere. It could be OT devices as well. Also, since we are into retail industry, we have different type of users. We have suppliers, externals, associates. We have different type of categories we need to check before we do that. So this is basically what it means for Ahold Delhaize as an IAM. Since in the retail industry is one of the most ad hoc task industries, I would say, not a very well structured industry like a bank for that matter. The need is to be very relevant. The employees are always on their toes, super agile to cater to the different needs of the customers. And again, to achieve all this, the identity and access management team plays a very intrinsic role. Some of the typical challenges that we feel or we see are, one being it's a isolated businesses. We are a bunch of 19 different businesses running together. Managing identity and access for these 19 businesses is not something very straightforward. And for me as well, in these 4 months, it has been an overwhelming experience understanding the need. I had never experienced that there could be such versatile demands from each business. Just giving examples, 2 common brands, Ethos and Gal and Gal, the way they operate, their demands are so different from an identity and access perspective is very hard to describe actually, right? Also, one of the other challenges that we typically or generally face is the high employee turnover, especially during the summer break, especially during festivals, which is about to actually start. We will face a large turnover. And that is not very cool. We need to be prepared for how to manage that. Talking about employee turnover and isolated business, the difficult part is that these identities are scattered. Like I was telling earlier, we don't have central systems that are feeding into the business. So we need to, the validation takes a while. But it also has to be fast to actually adopt to it and provision. Other challenges that that goes hand in hand is the lack of governance of these accesses. Hardest challenges is managing the external resources. We've seen cases and we have experienced where resources are brought in to do a project, deliver a project, but their IDs are not deprovisioned at the time they leave. It takes a while. It takes a month, could be a couple of months, which is I should not be saying that in a public forum like this. I don't know if anybody is an auditor here, but this is what happens generally. So these are, but you can't actually blame to the IAM part because I've shared an example. There is one manager managing so many externals. Even if we have a process of a recertification or access attestation, it's a very tedious job. So we have to bring in some kind of a AI there to make it simpler and efficient. Not talking about challenges, we definitely have to be compliant with regulations such as PCI, ISO, be up to the mark when we are designing solutions with standards such as NIST. And then we are in a cyber-centric world, so it does not go away without we getting hit by cyber attacks. And we get a lot of alerts. We have a very strong cyber defense team which shares very intuitive reports that we get something every week. It's good that we prevent it. So these are the typical challenges that we get. We have a lot of use cases where we talk about transfer cases from one store to another, but the identity remains the same. Even we have cases where the same person has multiple employments with Ahold Delhaize. And that's a very typical case which is very hard to manage for us, but we still do that. So these are standard challenges that we have. But what are we doing towards it? So currently, the way we are operating is we are actually putting a lot of band-aids everywhere. But our future goal is to have a unified user store. Like I was saying, currently we are split across a lot of feeds coming in from different sources. What we are trying to do is we are trying to consolidate everything. So consolidation is the way we are moving towards. We are trying to make one central HR system where we can get, which can be a source of truth for all identity and access data. We are also trying to integrate our suppliers, which are a lot in number, and we are also trying to bring them into one source, one feed, one system, one IAM system. Currently, the way we operate is we have different localized IAM systems, but we are trying to consolidate in one, and that one system will move and provision to the localized. Also, we are trying to integrate our business. Currently, we have a lot of operating companies, but we are trying to, again, bring them into one operational unit, or there is one central policies that are applied to them so that the above two can be achieved well. This is where we are moving towards. Now, coming to some of the lessons learned in this past 5 or 6 months that I have seen with my experience in this industry is that let's not, and it's not just applied to a retail industry, I think that applies to everywhere. Let's not overburden the IAM system with a lot of business logic. An overall enterprise landscape should be modular as possible. An identity and access management system should be meant for down provisioning accesses to, it could be any application or system. It should not be overburdened with a lot of SOD logic or a lot of HR specific logic. It should be, there should be different layers. It should be a multi-layered architecture, and one system should not have everything. Also, let's avoid creating in-house solutions and custom connectors. It could work well, but again, it depends on the size of the organization. Also, the size of associates, employees, and users. For a size such as Ahold Delhaize, it is not a very good idea. So if you are part of an organization which has 100,000 of users that you cater to, you manage, it's not a very good idea to get into custom solutions. And again, going back to the first point, if you have such a large organization, don't overburden your IAM system. But it makes sense if you have a few thousand employees or maybe 10,000 employees. You can overload your IAM system. Also, talking about the third point, maybe one of my fellow speakers will touch this topic in detail, is bring in change management as early as possible in the project, be it any project. IAM projects are generally a user-centric project, and it brings in a change in the behavior. And it is not that easy, right? I've seen a lot of projects plan where the change management, if it is a 500-line project plan, the change management is down at 450 or maybe 480 just before go live, which is not cool, right? Change takes time. So, and that's my advice, or my lesson learned at least, that we should bring in the change team, the change management as early as maybe at line 50. We should have them as part of the design. They should know. Also, going to the next, where I say, it may sound funny that UAT is not for testers, but for end users. Yes, it is, but I've seen UAT actually being organized, being facilitated with the wrong audience. UAT is meant for end users, separated from functional testing, SIT testing. UAT is for end users. I've seen complaints where end users say, oh, we were not part of when it was being tested. We don't know what this is. Who signed this off? There are UAT sign-offs. Bring in the right people in the UAT, not the testers, not the developers. Definitely not. And you will not suffer later. Last but not least, documentation. It is the key to any project, especially in a super agile world where people move to different projects. Somebody comes in, and if you don't know what the history of the project is, what were the requirements, why this was built, you will suffer a lot, or maybe you will take a long time to understand the context of the project, why it was being done. And when you drive it, you might end up somewhere where it was supposed to be. That was mostly it, but I'm happy to answer any questions if anybody has. Yes?
Yes, please. Can you talk about some of the impact of the challenges you talked about to the business or to the company?
Yes. good question, thank you. Impact to the business, delay in project delivery. First, cost that we did not actually include it, right? So if there is a delay, there's an added burden on the cost. And I would say it's a butterfly effect, or it's a domino effect, right? If any delay, if we don't, it also depends on the size of the project. If it is a critical project that impacts a business, it's more than the cost. It has dependencies on other subsequent projects, which delays or interferes with the overall roadmap of the company. And you might not get even an approval to move it to the next quarter or next week or next month. So all the investment and effort put in for the last 6 months or a year, or depends on the project again, it might go just in vain, right? Like I was saying, it's a super agile world. The requirements change very quickly. So sticking to the timelines is very important, which does not mean that you don't consider new requirements, but yeah, it's a fine line to maintain that balance, I would say. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Bharadwaj. I have a question on this first point. You mentioned that do not overburden with the IAM with business logic, but on your previous slide, your strategy was to build a unified user store.
Yeah.
So is it not really opposite? Because when you build I wouldn't call it, maybe you have thought through this, but
yeah.
it's a single point of failure, because you have you're trying to consolidate everything for all your 19 odd businesses together and people. So
No.
how do you yeah, can you reflect on this?
Yes, thank you. And that's a great question. I was expecting actually questions on the first part, because when I wrote it myself, I was under the impression that it will sound controversial, right? So when I say unified user store, right, it is just a identity repository, right? Making sure that everybody is part of one system, not 10 systems. So what happens today is, if we want to get a head count of how many suppliers, externals, employees, and different user categories do we have to refer back to 5 or 6 different local IAM systems, right? Or even ask somebody who's an external party, right? We don't want to do that. We want to bring them into one database, or one central database. Saying database is just to simplify things, right? That is the idea. So that we can just do a search operation, okay, and see, okay, who this user is, what is his few attributes, and that's it. When I talk about actually burdening with business logic could be an SOD conflict, or even taking a step back before SOD, it could be how do you define your role-based access control, and that's or a role modeling, and that could be a very heavy thing, right? So there are business roles, then you have IT roles, then you have technical roles, then you have certain groups associated in different down systems. It could be an Active Directory, AAD, or some other applications. Let's not let's not dump everything or build everything in IAM, right? Keep it as modular as possible. Definitely there would be roles, which would be birthright roles. So just stick to birthright roles. Don't take everything in IAM. Does that answer? Okay, thank you.
So
Are there more questions, or that's it?
I think you need to move over to the next speaker. So thank you very much. Hope you now I'd like to introduce my former colleague,
Yes.
Martin.
I can't get my button closed. Ugh, I think Corona kilos hit me somewhere. Should I click already to the next slide? Is it already on there somewhere, I suppose? I'm happy to present this, but it's not my slide. But so it's going to be a challenge, but let's improvise. Yeah, that's me. That looks more like mine. So yeah, business-friendly IAM is what I want to talk about a little bit today. So I'm trying to stay away from the technological point of view, and I'm trying to really focus on governance, processes, and structure, basically, and communication as well. So Let's start with introducing myself. It looks like I'm wearing the same suit even. I'm Maarten Bevers. I work for LeasePlan as the Information Security Officer. And I used to be indeed a colleague of Martin at Aal Hayes, and I also used to work at the Johan Cruyff Arena. So for the football fans out there, we're happy to have a chat around that as well. I'm a certified Identity Access Manager and a certified Information Security Manager. And like I mentioned, I try to stay away a little bit from technology because I think IAM is more than just that. I mean, definitely we need technology, but I think processes and how you handle your user and how do you communicate with your user is definitely an important step. So today I want to talk about a couple of things, like how is IAM presenting itself in your company, how to balance IAM security and usability, and lastly, how do you communicate successful IAM or not even successful, just in general IAM implementations. So you see a front door here, and the first picture also was a house, and you might think like, why is that relevant? Yes?
You're focusing on employees,
I'm trying to combine it a little bit, like do a bit of both. But my personal experience is mainly with employees indeed. But since I work at LeasePlan, I'm also trying to be a bit more customer-facing, so it's a bit of combination of both. Front door, you saw a house earlier. Well, how I always try to explain how IAM works within a company is as a house. The house itself would be your company, would contain your assets, would contain your data, and basically you have two parties working together to protect that house. You have information security, which you can see. I suppose I have a laser here somewhere. Oh, it doesn't work on the screen. Information security prevents you from climbing through the back windows, opening the doors, breaking in. There's a fence, there's a camera, there's a lock. So basically we try to keep people out who are trying to intrude or who are trying to enter illegally. But in the meantime, you also have identity and access management who is protecting the front door. And the front door is a strange function because basically it's double. You want to prevent people from coming in who don't belong there, but in the meantime you want to allow people in who do belong there. So how do you do that? You give out keys, you open the door for guests, and you allow your guests in. And once they're in your home, that doesn't stop your responsibility. At that point you start to work on what access do they have in my home. The electrician can come in the hallway and open the meter cabinet, if that's a word. Your friends can go to your living room, but if you have a stranger over the floor who just comes in, you keep them outside of the door. So there's definitely rules within your home, and the same applies to a company. You determine those rules as IAM, and that's difficult because it has to do with the human factor. If you look at this slide, you can see that the last data breach investigation report, social engineering and privilege misuse were one of the biggest breach patterns, together with, on the right side, that 85% of breaches involved a human element. And who protects the human element? That's basically IAM. So I think we have a very important role here to protect your company's data. So to symbolize it a little bit, I put the picture on the left, where you see a bunch of locks, which basically means we can protect our door with all the locks in place we have. But if your human element is that lock, in the end, if that one breaks, the rest breaks as well. So you can pick any random lock on this door here. So let's pick the right top one. If that's a human and you break that one, you can slide the pin out, slide the big pin out, and the entire door opens. And that applies to any other lock in this picture. So it looks very well secured, but the human element is, I would say, the weakest link. So it's a very important job of us to ensure that we have least privilege in place, or we have, let's say, admin rights restricted. So IAM is definitely key in this case. So we need to present ourselves as key in the company as well. So how do we do that? Well, we come back to, well, actually I mentioned electrician before, but let's call it a plumber in this case. We're water coming out of the tap as IAM. So people expect to open the tap, water runs out, you can take a nice glass of water and enjoy it. That's everyone's expectation. If the water is brown, if the water is sputtering, or if it's not coming out at all, that's when you have issues, that's when you start calling and saying, hey, you did a bad job regulating this. With IAM, it's the same. You expect to log in, it works, and if it doesn't work, then you start complaining and calling. But you don't realize there's a lot of pipe work behind, and people did a lot of work to make sure it streams as it does. So I think it's important that we under-promise and over-deliver as IAM. So we just want to make sure we focus on getting that water out of the tap, whereas in the meantime, we make sure that in the background, We work on the piping, let's say. We work on improving the systems. That's why I also say big projects combined with results. So you don't want to bother your business with, yeah, we're going to do role-based access to the fullest, and you're going to have super fast access in no time, because they start expecting it. And if you don't deliver, then you get annoyed businesses. So combine it with small results where you start, I think you mentioned it before as well, like birthrights. That's relatively easy. Still not easiest, of course, but it's definitely a first step. And then in the meantime, work on the role-based access. And lastly, the business knows the pain points best, of course. They actually experience it, and maybe they don't want streaming clean, cold water, but they just want water coming out of the tap and just don't want it to be brown, that's all. So I think that's something we can focus on as well. So, click. Security versus usability, we need to balance. And that's also part of listening to the business. Like, where do you want them to be more secured, and where do you want them to be less secured? And I think that sounds a bit strange coming from someone who is working in security, that you want less security. But I think there's a nice model which helps to determine that point, basically. So here it comes. As a company, you can determine your high and low point in security, and the same for usability. So you want a certain level of security where you say, okay, this is the highest we have, and this is the lowest we have, and within there you see like the vague lines. That's the threshold. So you have a bare minimum in security and a bare minimum in usability. And then it's just up for you to determine which applications do we place on this scale. So for instance, if you want to have a very high usability but low security, that could be, for instance, a customer-facing application. So that's something you just want to make sure it's easy to access. People don't have to jump to 10 hoops. Otherwise, they simply won't use it. There's going to be shadow IT. So this is something on that side of the scale. In the middle, you would have something more like customer service application. You don't want anyone at random to be able to access it, but in the meantime, you also don't need to have like Fort Knox in there. So it's a bit of a well, balance here, I would say. And on the other end of the spectrum, you have the opposite, of course: high security, low usability. So, for instance, financial application. Like, yeah, it's not nice for them that they have to go through MFA and they have to like use a token and whatever. But it's needed to ensure security is in place. So I think if you could explain it to the business, it becomes more understandable, except for the fact that you just make them go through all the hoops for every application. I think this is a much more balanced approach. Another big topic, I would say, in business-friendly IAM is communication. So why there's a bike on this picture, I'll explain later. It's important if you implement IAM solutions that you start with your communication strategy. So what do you want to explain to your business? There's a couple of things here: inform, convince, educate, motivate, or activate. Pick one of them. Like, usually you cannot combine these things because then you get a mixed message. You want to do either one of them, and you want to inform and help your business. Then, of course, you need to determine what's in it for them, or what's in it for me if you look from their perspective. So is it something that will add more work? Will it reduce the amount of work? Will it get more complex? Like, it is something they need to understand. And lastly, what type of behavior do you want to achieve? Or like, what type of behavior do you want to see in them, basically? And that's where the bike comes back. Probably some people know already the story, but I think it's a nice analogy to explain how you can change people's behavior. This is a Dutch bike brand called Van Moof. It maybe doesn't look like it, but it's an electric bike. It's quite expensive, and it's like high-tech. And they deliver it to you in a big box, and you have to assemble it yourself, and then you can start cycling. So all good. But as you can see here, the boxes were always delivered damaged. And they had a big issue with it because the bikes were dented, scratched, the cable were like broken, and they couldn't basically use the bike. So they got a lot of returns. Van Moof decided to start a communication strategy and inform the post-delivery guys, please be careful with these boxes, there's bikes in it, and they're expensive. But the post-delivery guys thought, a bike is metal, so we toss it in the van and we throw it out of the van, it should be fine. Didn't work. And then they put fragile stickers on it, and they put all sort of notifications, but there's tons of boxes with fragile stickers, so also didn't work. So Van Moof started thinking, what type of behavior do we want to see? Like, how do we want to change the way they handle the boxes? And I think they came up with a brilliant solution, which is they changed the box. to a flat screen TV within there, a bike. So all of a sudden, the post-delivery guys had to handle a box which they thought contained a TV. And all of a sudden, they put them nicely together in the vans. They took them out carefully. They delivered them on the front step. And the numbers of broken or damaged bikes reduced significantly. So the box still had the same text. There still is a bike on it. There's nowhere that it says TV except for the fact there's a big black box around it. So it changed the behavior, and therefore they got the result they needed without going into the bits and bytes, why it was relevant to carry this with more care. So I think IAM can learn from this to also sometimes just look, what do we want to see in the user's behavior? How can we change it? And maybe not focus on the fact that it's more secure for them. Maybe they don't even care. You just want to see a certain change in behavior. So I think it's a nice analogy to use. And with that, I think I already came to the end of my slide. So if you want to ask questions, feel free. And if you want to reach out on LinkedIn, there's a QR code. I hope it's bad practice to scan something random, but you can do it. You can trust me. Like, that'll be all.
Any questions for Martin?
Personal questions also fine. Like,
so if there are none, I actually have one. So one thing that we have run into, also I think we ran into during the time when you were at IDnext, is that a payroll application is a good example of an application that, from a security perspective, is not very sensitive because you can report the wrong time.
Yep.
That's basically what you can do in it for most employees. But from a privacy perspective, it can be extremely sensitive.
Yeah.
And one of our biggest problems in rollouts of new HR systems is that when people get suddenly ability to report time, especially when they have to approve time as managers, they discover that desktop single sign-on actually means desktop single sign-on. This works fine if it's your laptop, so you actually close it and you lock it when you not use it. But if you're in a shop floor or in a distribution center, you might be used to using this in kind of a kiosk mode. And suddenly, legal and privacy goes and says, no. Then someone can go and look at someone else's salary or potentially other information that is sensitive. And that's actually one of the hardest problem is to explain, to really balance the usability versus privacy.
Yeah, no, and I think that's indeed like in line with that model I tried to show. Like, and of course, it's not a science. At some point, it's a bit of a like feeling and a bit of a consensus together with the business. Like, you need to find a middle ground at some point. Indeed, if it's privacy related, it must be understandable that security is of utmost importance. Whereas if it's a little bit less privacy related or a little bit less security related, you might just lift the restrictions more. So I think that's also one of the other slides I said, talk to the business and get aligned with them. Maybe they're fine to sign off on the risk, let's say. Of course, we still are the guardians, so we need to determine a certain point. But there's definitely a matter of consensus, and in Dutch, the polder model, like find middle ground somewhere, I would say.
Yeah, I think this is one of the hardest thing, and we really miss Martin because he has black belt in talking to the business and getting them on board on the changes. Yep.
Which is also, I think, very important. So talk to them on regular occasions and see if we can find that middle ground.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Oh, there's one question. Sorry.
Can you give a few examples of which choices you've made in security versus convenience at LeasePlan? And
yeah, I think these are actually more or less directly from LeasePlan. So everything that's well, not everything, but most things which are customer facing, we try to really lift the security regulations more or less, like not lift them altogether, of course, but try to lower them as far as possible. Since we noticed that they simply would not use it. Like if we give them an application which they have to first authenticate and then get a second OTP, whatever, they're getting very frustrated and simply won't use it. So we try to lift security there a little bit more and focus more on ease of use, whereas our internal financial applications are, those are direct examples from LeasePlan. There we make it Fort Knox. So we want to make sure that there's no way for them, let's say, to do fraudulent business there. And we do get the complaints that they say, well, it's too hard to get access. But then at least we can explain to them why it's so important that there's more restrictions on that application. And we also haven't found the perfect model yet. I've also not worked there for so long, so it's you should forgive me for that fact. But we're trying to find consensus there as well. So talk to them, and every now and then shift a little bit in, well, where do we lift it? Where do we put a bit more? It's a bit of a touch and feel. All right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And we'll have our Allen keys.
Sorry.
So we've done groceries and many others. We've done leases. Now we're going to talk a little bit exactly about the Allen key. Hi, everybody. We're going to talk about the federated retail supply chain. But who am I? Hi, I'm Matthew Alstrom. Don't let the name fool you. I am not Swedish. That's a very long ancestor was. Myself, I grew up in the US. I'm a product owner for identity and access management for Inter-IKEA Systems. I've been with the IKEA brand since 1998, here in the Netherlands since 2002. Yeah, I love retail. I love home furnishings. And I came to identities later. So I'm an IKEA veteran that kind of came into this space. And I really like to do a lot of jam music. Same thing, QR codes, you know, they are sometimes a little bit sketchy. You can always verify with the link that's below. So that's your verification link below that if you want to look me up. IKEA. Let's start with something. There is no IKEA. It's a bit like the Matrix. There is no spoon. IKEA is a brand. It is not a company. And that means that there is a company that is the steward of the brand. So Inter-IKEA Systems, my company, we're the owner and worldwide franchisor of the IKEA brand. Now, what does that really mean? It means that we have a responsibility to make a lot of different companies work together to actually bring a brand experience to the end customer. Inter-IKEA Group in the middle here is what we're talking about. That's where I'm from. Too many screens looking to hear where we are. And what you can see is that this, even though it's horizontal, is a representation of vertically integrated company. IKEA has a couple of unique factors. Unlike other retailers, we manufacture our own products. We don't buy in stuff from another home furnishing producer, so we manage our own brand. That also means we have to manage our own supply chain, meaning we can't outsource a lot of the compliance questions, and we don't just get a box on a pallet somewhere. We've got to make sure that the wood gets to the factory, gets to the pallet, and comes in. So on the left side of the drawing there, you see all the IKEA service providers and the product suppliers. We're going to talk a little bit about that later. In the middle there, we've got Inter-IKEA Group, which handles the licensing and the actual production and the design. And on the right are the great guys who actually make IKEA real for the many people. So if you've ever shopped in any one of the IKEA stores that are out there, you've actually done business with one of the IKEA franchisees. Inca's the biggest one. Really doesn't matter for today's presentation who's who. Main thing is to think franchisees and then vertically integrated. How does it get from the supplier to the living room there where you kind of put the screws together and have a nice time watching TV? Well, as you might imagine, with this many companies comes way more systems. And the old way of doing stuff was to work in a nice closed environment. So we came from an ecosystem where even though there are all these disparate directories and different applications out there, there was an attempt to bring things to the middle, to have what we called the diamond, and that's again the beauty of vertically integrated, where you have the suppliers at one end, and then you have the customer on the other end. And how do you bring those to match up? When it's all your own ecosystem, it means you've got the control over the whole thing. One big Active Directory in the middle of it all. You have all of your applications there. But what happens is that we are actually opening up. Now, a couple of limitations right off the bat. Being a retailer, you think about your customer first, you think about your stores first, and you build a system for your workforce. You don't actually build it for your suppliers. So I'm just going to spoiler alert that right now, that when you're talking about your workforce, you're either on the job or you're off the job. You're not a potential supplier who's maybe waiting for a contract or one who did a delivery before. It's still, all of that life cycle stuff is tricky. But when we're opening up, think about, you've got your perimeter, and you're going to open that, and where does that take you? Well, one of the things that we have is actually partnerships with other big brands. So I say, it was a bit of a funny business. We say we only do our own stuff. Well, yeah, we do, but these days we've got more friends. One of our most successful products of the recent time has been our partnership with Sonos. It's the first time that we really have a co-branded product that is a part of the normal range. it means that we also need to play really nice with Sonos because they are a great brand and they've got their customer base. And many of the people who come to our stores to buy those products are buying a Sonos product sold by IKEA. They're not buying an IKEA product that's been supported by Sonos. So we really have to be very understanding there. That's a respectful partnership that we have. And they're an enterprise in their own right. Something that's a bit more high label or high visibility, but also short term, is with Lego. We have a partnership with Lego for a limited range. That was a short time kind of a stunt product. We've got a few other ones there. So you want to collaborate with them, but you don't have a real long-term partnership there. Of course, we have another part of our opening up, increased compliancy demands. Now, this is particularly on the data privacy side, but it's easier to say what countries do not have an IKEA company than which companies do, or which countries do. So that means we need to be respectful and understanding about how all of this works. And I think you guys know probably from your own business, Chinese cybersecurity law is very different from GDPR. And it puts a whole other set of demands on there, and it's very difficult to have a closed system that serves both geographies. And we haven't even talked about Russia, we haven't talked about Brazil, California, and whatever might come in the future. So compliance is one of those big things that's big for us. We see acquisitions coming up. IKEA, just like many other companies, is looking to expand its footprint. So Inter-IKEA Group, my part of the business, is been buying a couple of other less sexy companies, some logistics companies. About Bring SCM, which is a cold chain company out of Sweden for our food part. But TaskRabbit is one that our franchisees bought. So Inca purchased TaskRabbit, which is one of these gig economy companies. Again, same thing. Do you really want to swallow it up, put it part of your ecosystem? Or do you actually want to respect that why did you acquire it in the first place? Let it maybe kind of do its own thing. But it needs to be part of the family. All of this is pointing to more and more trust relationships. Again, the beauty of an ecosystem with a firm boundary, you're either outside, and we don't know who the heck you are, and you could be a total invader, or you're inside, and then you're part of the warm and fuzzy, and then everything's open to you. We're seeing many more gradations in terms of trust, and how do you manage that? And then the big one is about exponential growth actually in our supply chain. So a few of these drivers, what we see, IKEA has potential of about another 3 billion customers on the planet. And how do we come to 3 billion? We see two things driving there. First is just the geography. There are countries that don't yet have an IKEA store. They don't have the IKEA experience. And we're going to do that not by way of the way we've done in the past 75 years, by plunking big giant stores on every potato field we can find, but by having a diversity of touch points. Smaller stores, bigger stores, e-commerce, all of that is part of the reach. That's on the retail side. More interestingly, for the development of the supply chain, it's more suppliers closer to the customer. So you're going to have growth in the number of suppliers, and you have a growth in the diversity of them as well. We're not just going to be doing business with the absolute biggest supplier that we can find. It's no longer just that one guy who can do 1 million lamps every week. But yeah, we can do smaller numbers, provided it's just for that one territory. It's also really interesting when you talk about countries like India or Mexico, where one of the rules with the business is actually you have to do some level of local supply. Together with suppliers, just generally, more companies, there's also increased granularity of access. So within each supplier, we used to have, maybe a Post-it, account somewhere, and they'd log into their supplier portal. Now we want to be able to differentiate between the account manager, the product auditor, the sourcing partner, you name it. There's about a dozen different roles that at each supplier will be there, each one with its own access model. So you've got real growth there in terms of the numbers. In case you were wondering, that little red box there, that is the supplier number. If you ever look at an IKEA tag, there's a lot of information there, and that's one of those. You can see the same product made from different suppliers. So that's one of those keys for us that we see. So when it comes to how do you do this, and you get into, if you do a managed identity or a federated identity. And that's kind of what where we're at right now, is that we're also on the back of all of these big mergers and acquisitions, on this back of these transformations, new partners, you're scratching your head like, oh my God, what's this guy talking about? Do you put it out to them, or do you keep it to yourself? If you take federated, you guys are familiar with a lot of this stuff. The nice thing about federation is that management decisions usually get taken closer to the source of truth. You're out there in the field, the person can look someone in the eye and say, yeah, I know you, and manage some of the life cycle points. In many ways, you can actually take care or reduce the pain of your region-based compliance. That's very straightforward because a lot of the processing activities are out close to the supplier, and we're not bringing it to us. If any, or at the very least, you're putting a bit of separation between yourselves from the legal sense, meaning that you're doing all the processing activities, that's your business, we just take it for truth. It also means that from a user experience point of view, you can provide to that end user something that's more familiar to them. We saw WeChat this morning come up. Anyone who's actually interacted with any of the Chinese ecosystem knows that it feels a little bit different from ours. And we had a really interesting user adoption journey when we started rolling out Office 365 in China and Okta MFA. We actually had to do a lot more training out there because for a Westerner, the patterns were all straightforward. It felt just like what we have in the consumer space. It was a few steps to the right of what they have in there every day when they're dealing with Weibo and WeChat and things like this. Advkontakte, and every other region has their particular preferences. So federation helps to reduce that burden. Also makes scale really easy because once it's federated, you can just have your central hub and say, do you meet these requirements? Yep, plug it in, away we go. So you can actually address this exponential growth in suppliers that we have coming up. Of course, nothing's perfect. So when we're talking about why wouldn't you want to do federation, well, yeah, you got to have a really good foundation of trust. You got to have good agreements, auditable, follow-upable, and that varies. Sometimes you can really have penalties there, and that depends on what do you have in terms of the directive nature of your contract. We have two big types of relationships. We have our supplier relationships where we're buying in stuff. We can be fairly directive on the prerequisites. We also have our franchisees, who are business partners in a very serious sense, but it's a give and take. Because from our side in the center, they are actually our customers. They pay a franchise fee to access the range and access the brand, and we take the margin on the wholesale products. So it's back and forth. Downside also of federated identities is the variability of the technologies with a lot of prerequisites. Because you can either simplify, say, well, only this standard, that standard. Well, the whole point is actually you want to offer a diversity of choices. So how do you manage that? That's a bit the balance. Schemas. I think we don't even have to say much more. Just schemas need to match up. If you really want to do granular access, you need to have some trustworthy attributes coming in. You need to know what's actually happening there. And then, of course, the big reason for me not to do a federated identity would be the governance complexities, just generically. Because if you can't actually know big picture what's coming in, and if you can't put the decisions in the right place, it's not the right thing. So on the other side, managed identities, of course, you guys had a chance to read what's on the slide there. But of course, you're the single source of truth. You know what you got. You pay for it because it takes a lot of effort to make it happen, but you do have that straightforward governance oversight as well because it's right there for you to see. You have a controlled user experience. Again, you're calling the shots, you're setting it all up. If it works well, then you can keep it working well, and if it doesn't, well, you're not going to have that weird protocol and that one third-party tool that they implemented with that weird YubiKey, and your support desk is trying to figure out why they can't log in to ship the product in time. You also have a really nice, consistent attribute set, something that's so boring but makes such a big difference. You can actually know how's your schema built up, and you can apply it. Of course, then, I've already touched on some of the cons. It is the management burden. If you're going to do it yourself, you're doing it yourself. That means you need to staff for it. You need to really have the knowledge on staff of the entire landscape. And this is one of the challenges that we have today, is that we have administrators who know nothing about the supplier who are being asked to make consequential decisions about who's accessing what. And they're just key punching because, if they don't, they're going to get the manager in their neck saying, hey, come on, why isn't this working yet? So that's the life cycle challenges there. You also end up having multiple accounts for the end user. This is the user experience point again. So these guys, they've got usually their own ecosystem, maybe even a secondary ecosystem because there are sub-suppliers that they're also part of there. And then you add another IKEA login on top of that. Not only is that terrible for the end user, for their user experience, it also means the life cycle is going to be bad. That's when you get the post-it passwords. That's when you get shared accounts. That's when they leave the company, but HR forgot to cancel their account. All of a sudden, they're working at the competitor, and they've still got insight to the POs that are being spun up. You don't like that. And it makes it really tough to achieve global compliance. If you've got one directory sitting in Sweden or in the Netherlands or in a GDPR country, and the Chinese authorities come saying, hey, you should be mastering all of your identities on our soil, what do you do? Well, that adds a lot of complexity there, and each time there's another set of rules that come up, you end up expanding your network and adding another directory that needs more synchronization and has more points of failure. And this just, I mentioned the tendency towards shared account behavior, which for me is one of the main ones there. So where do you go? Well, there's a great Swedish word. Again, I'm not Swedish, but one of the things I learned from my Swedish colleagues is the idea of lagom. Lagom is a Goldilocks idea. It means just enough, not too much, not too little. And so the way we're going forward is that it's going to be federation for those who can handle it. And that means that we're going to have a bit of a checklist of how do you actually spin up an organization to federate. And that means, first and foremost, do you have the human capacity? I always say you can buy in the most amazing technology, but if you don't run it well, it'll fall apart in no time. So it's about the demonstrated capability and the accountability to live up to what we put on paper. Same thing, I can scribble something at the bottom of a contract. There's nothing that says I'll actually do what it says, unless we follow up, unless we audit. And I both love and hate auditors at the same time. We spend a lot of money on auditing. The flip side, if we do nothing with what they tell us, then it's been a waste of money. So we have to use what we get out of the auditors for improvement, not just to put a tick box. Of course, the technology fundamentals need to be there. This means that we want to have enterprise-level environments or comparable. We have a bit of a debate going on right now about what do we do with let's call them the social IDs, the consumer identities. Or do we allow folks to come in with their LinkedIn, their Google, their Facebook, their vKontakter, their WeChat, you name it, something that we're not mastering and that anybody can just spin up as they want. Pros and cons to both. What we're looking for also, if you can handle, is a really high volume of lifecycle moments. Is it worth it? Because there's a lot of oversight that goes into the federation side. Even if you're not managing it yourself, you're following up with the rest. So it's got to be worth it for them and worth it for us. And of course, if your user experience demands it, does it actually make it better for you? And that's not always self-evident. We have a wide range of suppliers. Some of them are multi-thousand coworkers size, and some of them are one. Like we've got Bulgarian truck drivers, he doesn't have an Active Directory sitting in his garden shed, so for that guy, you want him to make it easy to log in with a Gmail account. And if we can't do it with a federated way, we still need to be in a position to do the managed identity. And that means, is there an unclear ability to audit? If we can't trust what's coming out of there, then just come on home. We've been doing it for years. Yes, it's expensive. Yes, it's labor intensive. But if we can cut out a lot of the bulk, say, all right, the big boys are going to federate, then we have the time to focus on the edge cases. If we are not certain about the technologies that they're bringing to the table, this is something that's happening a lot in the different spaces, and mostly because of the territories we're going in. Sometimes there's a local vendor that could be totally fine, but we just don't know it. So until we have a chance to really get to know it, we want to make sure that we take care of it in a way that's trusted and reliable. And the small scale guys. Which is interesting because depending on where you take it, either the small guys are the total reason why you would want to federate. We see it as a reason to just spend a little bit of money, manage their identity, and give them that nice experience. And that's how we try to get the lagom idea into a federated supply chain. And with that, thank you for the time.
Questions?
Oh, it's one and then two, yeah.
Yeah, just so it becomes, or the partnerships are important at IKEA and becoming even more important. That's a use case that you focused on. So I was just wondering, because it's the aspect of managing those partners. Have you, in a broader sense, is IKEA using a system to onboard new partners, and is that then linked with the contracts? So sort of a joiner mover levers, which you fit into?
Have you been reading my email? Yeah, no, actually, yes. The short answer is yes. We have a system that we call SSCM, Supplier Sourcing and Contract Management, which until now was separated from the identity system. So this is one of the pain points. So over here, you had this beautiful life cycle management on the contract side, entirely disconnected from everything that was on an identity management and access side. So you had double key punching, and the granularity didn't match up. So what I was mentioning about these different stages of access. So when you have a supplier relationship, first you go to a trade fair, you go to the Shenzhen Electronics Fair or whatever. You make the first contact with the supplier, and then you have, hey, I call it the courtship. Let's get to know each other a bit better. Maybe there's an NDA, some information gets exchanged, no deal is done yet. Then maybe there's a test buy, so let's see if this is any good. And then there's a whole record that goes along with our evaluation of the test buy. Then there's a first test production run. Again, a whole audit happens there. Then you're like, you know what, you're awesome. Let's do a product. Boom, you put a product into production and then you're on runtime. And then you're spitting out thousands and thousands of pieces a day, a week. You've got to follow up on that, you've got all the logistics. Then that product goes out of the range. No fault of the supplier, but we've got no business for them today. Does that mean we want to lose their contacts? We want to remove them from the system? Not at all. They go into the pool of possible suppliers, and then they go into their category. All these different states of the life cycle are managed in the contract system, but until now have not been in the identity side, because each one comes with a different level of access and a different level of system. There's about 25 applications in our supplier portal that can be easily governed by tying together the contract management to the governance thing, and that's the project that we're working on now. That's one class of suppliers, there's others, but that's the one we're looking at on that. And just to kind of do the extension of the projects I'm working on, that's one environment. We're taking the thoughts behind how do we tie up the supplier management from that application to the identities and putting it on our other big supply chain, which is food. So our food supply chain is separate from the home furnishing supply chain for pretty obvious reasons. I know some people say the meatballs taste like sawdust. I promise you there's no sawdust in the meatballs. But the principles are the same. The same idea of the courtship, the test buy, the follow-up. But so from a technological perspective, they're separate, even as you want to apply the same governance principles which the bookkeepers want to have. So long answer to a short question. Yes, supplier management is in contract side, not connected today, but that's one of our main priorities, which led me to actually share this one. And we had another question?
No, I'm just interested to see on the managed identity side, I'm thinking of the Bulgarian driver. If you've started to look at things like decentralized identity, and I'm saying decentralized versus self-sovereign because you'll want to know that the driver's license is a trust anchor behind who's issued the license, that's the right license for that size vehicle, etc. But do you see some of those schemes being able to move in and out of your managed patterns as well?
Great question. Yes, I certainly hope so. It's something that because the driver for that is to remove a lot of the current the drudgery of the admins who are having to validate all these points. If we can ease the validation, then the management of the identity becomes easier. So you see, how do you remove friction from each side? So the management, make the management easier. And then those kinds of, any kind of a sovereign identity or anything that helps to rely on that. We know for our workforce, we have some good examples. In Sweden, they're using the bank IDs for a number of just a lot of different additional enterprise applications. And so we do see that coming up. We know it for the tax authorities, actually, for a lot of import-export. We're starting to see that come up. But
I was thinking, is that the onboarding, it's that combination of many of the things that you need to know about how to pay somebody, so the onboarding and the identity, and then the paying, and then the revocation, all of these things can come together to be sort of a smarter life cycle rather than just one thing.
yeah.
But it's interesting that you say bank, because there are different trust anchors for different parts of that. But how you bring that together and then give it back to the driver in a way where next time they onboard, it's much, much easier.
Exactly. I think one of the spot on, and one of the principles we're also trying to apply, IKEA has made a lot of its success over the years by squeezing the air out of products, processes, and all kinds of, so the flat pack, get the air out of it. We came up with a paper pallet that has less air in it. If we can take the air out of processes as well. So if it's, sometimes you do need to have some middleware, you need to have some management, but if it's non-value added administration, get it out and try to focus on the verifications that do make a difference. Anything else?
So I actually do have a question that's related to that. So one of the things we're seeing is that historically, the cybersecurity has mostly been applied to IT contractors. But as some of you might know, our cheese supplier, or the people who slice the cheese and put them in packages and drives them to our stores, got hit by a ransomware attack. So we didn't have any cheese in the spring. we were very sad about that because, of course, you take away the cheese from the Dutch, and they get very, very mad. So what we're seeing is that it's not. It used to be that was only the IT suppliers that were audited from a cybersecurity standpoint, but if you lose one of these key business partners, if you, for example, I know that most people don't care about it, but the herring that you're selling is actually made in a factory that my cousin runs in Sweden.
Ah.
So that's a major supplier. I was very sad that you didn't put that as a key.
Abbas is always going to be something close to our heart.
Yes. But are you seeing similar patterns where the cybersecurity becomes an important part of the supply chain management and the supply chain risk management?
Absolutely, and that's what's behind. I put the one that to be able to verify which technologies are appropriate. So is a supplier able to actually meet up with it? Because if you're going to put the connections in there, you want to make sure that everything's trustworthy, not just the management of it, but also that there's no side doors. Some territories are easier than others. What we're looking at is we have a code of conduct and our auditing principles called IWay, which is how we produce stuff. It's a little bit how we, it is the backbone of our ethical sourcing. And they're looking at how do we add, as part of our, I think every company has a digital transformation these days. As part of our digital transformation, we're bringing in also these components to our IWay. And we are hoping to leverage those to have a consistent platform so that when they sign the contract, they know what they're in for. Because no one wants a surprise. We don't want to make a deal with the supplier only to have them fail on the cybersecurity. And then you get into a tough conversation with the business. So yeah, but they make the most amazing quilt covers. I'm like, yeah, but they've got a terrible enterprise IT. So it's like, well, what does the customer want? Quilt covers. So you know who wins that conversation. But great question. And that's one of the dimensions of the change, is to bring that one up as well.
So thank you very much.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
So yeah, maybe for the rest, the question was, do we actively help the companies? We have a long history of long-term investments with key suppliers. And we've helped them, and now I'm going to get into storytelling land. If you go to Poland, there are statues of Ingvar Kamprad, the IK in IKEA, in different key places, because he helped Poland industrialize its way out of the later part of the Soviet years and into the modern economy. We're doing that again. We lean in, we co-invest, we bring knowledge, and we, depending, of course, different companies act in different ways. Some companies say, oof, you failed your compliance, I'm sorry, I just can't, and they walk away. We say, oh, you failed your compliance? All right. Where did you fail? Let's take a look. And then you take a deep breath, you roll up your sleeves, and together you fix it, because we know that delivers actually a better product for the consumer in the long run. So we do help out in a serious way.
Thank you very much for your questions. So we have about 10 minutes until there's food, and I think the food is going to show up there, so it's not here yet. So we're not stopping you from eating yet. But are there any other questions, especially to other people in the panel, that you've kind of realized that this was what I wanted to understand, from either Al-Dalhas or from my lease plans perspective?
One of the key takeaways within the keynote when we started the day was that, that she saw big benefit of AI in identity management. Is one of you guys looking into that? And if yes, what are you looking at and what do you expect?
Yeah, I think actually I can answer that from our perspective. Within LeasePlan, we're trying that to use AI or machine learning to do the hard work which the business is currently doing. So for instance, role-based access, now we go to the business and talk to them like, is this the list of applications that's required for you to be able to do your job? And is this like least privilege or do you need more? And we basically start building that by having a conversation. And now we're looking into AI to do that for us. So they just look at a whole bunch of employees and make like a presumption, like this is probably the list. And then we go to the business with that pre-formed list, and then the discussion is much easier. Because you don't have to go through an entire list of applications, but we just have like, this is probably what the AI at least presumes is the role you need. And I think that's just the beginning of more steps where AI can help to, let's do the dirty work, let's say, and have a first step done to go to the business.
Yeah, I think I can build on that a little bit. We're doing very much the same. And then plus one, if we put on the supply chain, we see non-human actors as part of the access model. So the AI, so that one giant automated production machine that actually has no humans making it, but it's all fed with digital plans, is also part of the, so we see AI to AI interactions as part of it. So when we talk about privileged access, so where you just remove the humans and making access decisions and things on that level as well. So it's kind of the same idea, but then without the humans even.
Yeah. And on top of what you just explained, we are doing also something similar there, but we are also leveraging AI for the privileged access part in monitoring. So not just human monitoring, but some standard use cases can be just monitored with an AI, and then alerts can be raised. So it's advanced monitoring, where the alerts raised are typically managed by a human, whereas basic monitoring can be done by standard AI bots. So that can be leveraged in privileged access as well.
I actually would like to give an example. It isn't from IDnext, but from another Dutch company. They had one of their partners were hit by a cyber attack, so they shut down their access, and they went back before they re-enable it again to see, okay, who needs access? And this partner had 800 accounts, and after they did an actual recertification to see who really needs access, 3 left. So this is one of the things where you can look at AI. So traditionally, you send out this recertification once a quarter, once a year, or whatever, and people went like, okay, all the 50 people get access again. But where you can do today is to connect this, for example, with logins. So if you don't log in, well, then it's not very likely that you actually need this access. Yeah. So if you have 800 accounts and only 20 of those logged in, probably you should take a look and see if these other 780 people really need the access, because they're clearly not using it, at least. Yeah. And there we can see an ability to kind of, by applying analytics, you have a chance to break the kind of the convenience versus security and try to focus. Like if you have one partner where you can see that, well, the 700 people who does log in, perhaps the more focus should be on the 100 that doesn't log in and see, do they really need access? And obviously login is a simple example, but you can also see what we see in more and more implementations is that you have these normal behavior, and then you have the abnormals. So you focus your security around the abnormals. And for example, if you have someone that usually logs in from Europe, but suddenly logs in from China, perhaps you should give them an MFA, just see if they actually are the person that is there. You don't necessarily need to give it MFA on everything they do, but do it once. If they fail, well, then we probably should take a little bit more look into it. Any last question? I think we have another 5 minutes or so. If not, I would like to say thank you to the panel, and there was quite a lot of very interesting insights.
Thank you.
Thank you.